You'll learn some things from us, and we'll learn some things, a lot of things from you. And so any topic is open. Of all the topics that are open for discussion, this is kind of brave new world stuff. The concept of what can other sports bring to swimming is a very different one. So we'll give a great example. If you're going out and you're running a distance run, 10K or more, you have water stops, you have feeding stations, you have apples, you have oranges, you have all kinds of stuff going on. You have gels all stuffed in your shorts. But that concept of nutrition, dehydration, and so forth is new to the U.S., or new to the world of swimming, not just the United States. And I can give you a great example of that. I became the national team physician for, in particular, open water, but some of the pool swims too. And I guess my second or third world championship was in Fukuoka, and our athletes were near the bottom of the world in ranking at that point. Italians were ruling, the Russians were doing well, the U.S. was just, and they said, okay, we've got this formula. And I said, you know, why, we've got great athletes, why are they not performing? Because 2 world championships before we had won the world championship. He said, well, we have this new thing that our dietitians are doing, that they, for the first half of the race, we super hydrate them. And then halfway through the race, after they really start needing the fuel, we start fueling them up for a hard finish. And I went, what? I mean, this doesn't even make a grain of sense. The nutrition you take in the first half of the race is how you finish the second half of the race. Is there any reason why the U.S. athletes couldn't finish a race? Yeah, we had it backwards. Well, it took a little convincing, but I did switch the protocols, and then the U.S. came back up, not because the athletes got better, but we were feeding them stuff to burn. Where does the fuel come from? So this is an example of something that runners knew, cyclists knew, everybody else knew, but for some reason it never interpreted well, it never was interpreted by the swimmers very well. And so the concept that you could lose 5 pounds when you're out running, how much electrolytes and stuff you're going to lose when you're swimming, depends on water temperature, depends on humidity, a lot of different things, but the answer in most situations is the same. You're still losing it. So what we now teach our open water teams is that they start with electrolytes, finish with water, and the electrolyte mix is determined upon the ambient environment that they're in. And this came up in the last session, and I'll just share that and then we'll go to the panelists, is what we ended up doing is if I have a cold day, the athlete's going to need energy to swim, and they need energy to stay warm. So the amount of carbohydrates and things that they'll be burning will be higher than it would be on a warmer day or warmer water. So we may go a mixture, and let's just say 50-50 is our average mix. We may go 60% electrolytes, 40% water. If the colder it gets, I'll start shoving those numbers back a little bit. Vice versa, when they start getting in warm situations, they're starting to sweat, starting to lose a fair amount of water, also electrolytes though. But I may change that mix so that it's 40% electrolytes, 60% water. Also depends on where they are in the race as to how I mix that. Okay? And then I try to get the coaches to be flexible, so if the situation changes over a 25K or over some of these long races, I may have to mix it differently in the last half of the race than I do in the front half of the race, because it changes. The athletes changes, their need has changed. So all those things coming about, but that basically came from the running world that we applied to our open water team. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have each one of the panelists introduce themselves, and then I'm going to throw some questions to them and then open it up for questions that you guys may have. Keep an open mind. There's a lot that the other sports can teach swimming that we're behind in, and this is a great forum for that.
I'm Liz Tucker, and I am the Race Director Certification Manager at USA Triathlon. So I manage all of our education programs for event directors in triathlon.
I'm Jim Wheeler, and I have a company called Total Aquatic Management. We do lifeguard training, aquatic consulting, accident investigation work. But during the day, I'm actually the Recreation Services Manager for the City and County of San Francisco. So I take care of about half of the city's recreation pools.
Ralph Goto, City and County of Honolulu Lifeguards. Chris Brewster's stand-in stunt double.
We got upgraded. Greg Buchanan, Lieutenant with San Diego Lifeguard Service.
So this is obviously a question that should be directed at Liz, but I'm going to start with the two gentlemen that are in safety and rescue. When you're setting up for a road race, or you're setting up for a bike race, or you're setting up for a triathlon, or you're setting up for an open water event, what is the differences in your setup, besides obviously the environment? Surprise.
Thanks, Joe.
The biggest difference for us as it relates to anything aquatic based is if something happens on the land, you can assess your patient and determine if it's a patient a lot quicker. Out in the water, we are looking to see whether they're victims and or patients. And what I mean by that is some people in the water just need assistance. They need to get and float on something for a few minutes and they're fine, versus the same person who's having chest pain. So what we'll do is basically, as from a land-based thing, so I mean we have the same thing at the beach. If someone's going to all of a sudden have a medical issue at the beach, we just activate the EMS system, and it, to be honest, in a large city like San Diego, it goes a bit like clockwork, but all the guards are EMTs, and they're able to basically give some initial first aid. But on the ocean front and in the water, you actually have to make sure you rescue the person first before you can start your medical. So there's a rescue component to it, and then there's the medical side. So, I mean, I'll just give you a quick story. On Monday, we had a surfer who went face down in the water. And at that point, you know, the report is that he has a heart attack in the water. We activate 3 plans all at once. One is land-based, one is water-based, and one is air-based. So we have a lot of resources, and granted, a lot of people don't have those resources, but we don't know exactly how we're going to extricate, but we know we need to do it whatever is the fastest. So when it comes to water events for us, we will always have to decide, well, what's the call, or what are we dealing with, and then we're going to have to figure out now how we're going to make the rescue, and then what's our extrication method. And like I said, some extrication methods may just literally be let the person hang on a rescue board for a few minutes and that person's fine, right? Disqualify them or something. But in other cases, if it's something medical, you got to not only make the rescue, but then you also have to get them to some land-based EMS for transport to the hospital.
Is there any difference in your tertiary care setup, or is it the same, regardless of what your setting is?
It'll be the same for us.
It's the same? The same. Okay. One of the questions I kind of threw out to the last group is a consideration, is we have many events like what these gentlemen are talking about where their extrication time is very short. From the time they rescue and assess to the time they hit care centers, emergency rooms, and so forth, we're talking 4 or 5 minutes. How many of us are holding events that are 20, 30 minutes away from that setting, and is that a safe setting for us to be in? It's worth a thought. It's always pristine, it's always beautiful out there, but is that the best place where our athletes should be? So that's a consideration. I know in FINA, when I go to an event, we have to have a rescue boat clearly on the course, and several different rescue boats actually on the course, but also have a whole flotilla of backup rescue boats. If one of them leaves, it's got to be replaced. It's got to be replaced right then, not later, not when we get to it, not when we call the other team by. It's got to be equipped and ready to go. So I may, depending upon the course, have 4 rescue vessels out there. One does a rescue, another one's got to go back. Well, if you're sitting in the mountains of, well, I don't know, Maine, holding an event, does that mean you have 5 ambulances lined up at the starting line? And as they extricate people, you get to the point where you have none, so you just pull everybody out? I mean, how do you do this? I mean, it's something that you have to think about. Along those same lines, Liz, of course, you work with all the different, with biking, with running, with the whole gamut. And how do you set up differently for rescue, for those types of things based upon those, besides the obvious of when we're interested and concerned about drowning versus other?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and we often think about this. We overthink the safety on the swim, as triathlete race directors, because I don't know a single race director that doesn't breathe a huge sigh of relief when the swim is over and everybody is out safely, because it's the most nerve-wracking part of the course. And so and that's where the most incidents occur. And so I think the goal is really the same. We want every athlete that starts to finish, and we want them to be safe, and we want them to have fun, whether it's the swim, the bike, or the run. And so when you're setting up on the bike and the run course, it's thinking about the same principles as you are on the swim. If an incident occurs at the halfway point on a bike or a run, what's the closest medical personnel? What's the communication plan? Do the volunteers out on the bike and run course, who may be your Boy Scouts that we talked about this morning? These are great places. Aid stations on the run are a great place to put Boy Scouts. And so do they know what the communication plan is? I think in open water swimming, you think about what that communication plan is, but making sure that is in place in all the different elements is really important in triathlon, that you have to have communication between what's going on in the water and what's happening out on the course. I'm the run course coordinator for our national championship events, and it's important for me to know where the first athlete is on the swim course and when that person is going to be exiting the water, so that I make sure that the run course is set. And so communication is really key, and making sure that the emergency personnel know the different extraction points. This is something that's become a huge focus for us recently, is where is the designated extraction point from the water? Is it through the transition area? Is it across the water, the body of water? We have a swim that's held on a river, and it's actually easier if someone is rescued to be taken to the far side of the river, and because the road over there can go straight to the hospital without crossing the bike course. And so those are some of the safety things that we have to keep in mind, is making sure that we're not impacting the other parts of the race at the same time.
As you're training those athletes, is there anything that you can pass on message-wise to the swimming side that you see routinely being done and done well by the runners/cyclists?
I think in terms of training, one thing that is lacking for the swimming part of triathletes is they're not training in the body of water that they're going to be racing in. When you train for running, and you go run on the road, and when you train for biking, you go bike on the road. But when triathletes train for swimming, the swimming part of a triathlon, they're swimming mostly in a pool. And so I think the simulation of the race environment is really important. And so encouraging athletes to practice how the race is going to be done is really important, and taking part in clinics that are going to show what that environment is like is also going to be key.
Jim, you kind of go all over the United States, and you look at different race settings, and you look at different environmental settings. Are there messages that you see that are common in various areas of the United States that are well done? Or are there messages that you're seeing that we're really not doing as well as we should do in general?
I'm glad you didn't ask the question as written, because it said something about generalizations, and I really try to stay away from generalizations as a rule. I think what I see is, so many different places, so many different sizes of races, and so many different standards. And I think the beauty of what's happening here today is that at least somebody's trying to say maybe there needs to be some universal precautions, for lack of a better term, or universal standards. I think the thing that we've grappled with as a former member of the long distance committee for masters and the safety committee, and now I'm on the open water committee, and I think what we grapple with is every time we try to say this is what we should really do, one group of the country says, yeah, but my swim has 25 people, I can't afford that, you'll ruin it. And so I think it starts to become an issue of, we know, I think it's so vastly different from place to place, high altitude, cold water, places, beautiful lakes in Oregon versus, you know, going down and swimming in the Gulf in Florida. I mean, you know better than anybody traveling around the world. The venues are so vastly different. The interest is different. The level of experience of our race directors and volunteers is different. There's so many things. I don't think you could generalize what's going on. I think you have to be aware that there's all these issues out there, and how are you going to coalesce everybody into getting this, you know, into a place where they're all safe. And you guys have formalized that and done that better than a lot of groups, just because of the momentum that triathlon's built since, you know, the Dave Scott and Mark Allen days till now. You know, it has been an amazing difference in your organization. And I think because of the popularity, you know, you're drawing from three bodies: runners, bikers, and swimmers, versus us just drawing from mostly swimmers or people who think they want to be swimmers. There's a vast difference there in what you found and how you've been able to adapt based upon need and demand. So I think big to small, you know, what we need to do is figure out how to develop it for everybody, make it easier.
Something I'm going to kind of pick up on something he mentioned, and our two safety coordinator folks are going to kind of chuckle with this, but a lot of event directors worldwide will look to have their medical needs met by volunteerism. That they are sanctioned by or sponsored by a particular group of medical care clinics or something along those lines. And you have to be somewhat careful with that. I've had in this past year at least 4 different events where they had good health care on the beachfront. They had an excellent ambulance service, advanced cardiac life support service, sitting at the front, ready to go. They had hospitals, or a hospital, that had been oriented toward the event, had sports medicine people, had the appropriate type of physicians and so forth on standby, had bought into it. All those organizations had their names on t-shirts and all that stuff. The problem was, the beachfront was set up by a Catholic hospital. The ambulance was an independent that was actually owned by a university setting. And the hospital was a for-profit hospital. None of them talked to each other. So when one of the U.S. athletes went down as I was team physician, I knew who was on the beachfront, and I said, "Where did our athlete go?" And they went, "We're not sure." Because the ambulance was independent of all the other parties. So we didn't even know where the athletes were going to, and in some cases they all went to different hospitals. As team physician for the U.S. in Montreal World Championships, it turned out that we had a swimmer go down in the 25K from hyponatremia. Actually had to go in and get her out. We had a diver hit the board with her head, and we had a water polo player that took a ball to the face, all within the course of 45 minutes. I was the only physician that was there at the time for the U.S. They sent 3 athletes to 3 different hospitals because none of the different independent entities spoke to each other. Not acceptable. And these guys are used to that coordination process, so it's a linear transportation process. Everything is go. A speaks to B, speaks to C. That history, which is critical to the care of your patient, is all transmitted straight through with the athlete for the optimum health and safety of your athlete. But you got to be careful if you cross systems that you may cross some medical, political boundaries that you're not aware of. And you just have to be aware that that's there. Is that going to be more of a problem as time goes by and healthcare changes? And I can tell you it's going to be a bigger problem as healthcare changes. When you have all these different competing entities competing for the healthcare dollar. So think about that and don't forget that aspect. One thing I'm going to toss out to the panel, I'll have each one of you kind of just give a few sentences about it. If you're setting up for an elite level event versus a large event, which may be an all-comers thing with thousands of folks, versus a master's event, do you set them up differently?
Well, For triathlon, that depends on what the type of race is. If it's an elite race and it's a prize money race, then the course is actually going to be different than our age group course would be set up. It's usually a very specific, it has to be a very specific distance, and there are different rules that govern our elite athletes than our age group athletes. One thing that we do for age group athletes versus our older athletes, our masters athletes, is we often, at our national championships, we actually put them in the water first and let them get out on the course. And rather than having a small wave time in between them and the rest of the field, we let them cover the distance of the course and have a longer break, about a 20-minute break before we put any more athletes in the water, which gets them out onto the bike course and clear of the water before we put our faster athletes on there. So the safety is going to be the same. We're going to have the course set up the same way, but we're taking into account that they're going to probably be out on the course for a longer amount of time, and we want to get them through the course before the heat of the day comes. And that would be the same if we had younger athletes as well. We would either put them in a first wave, give them plenty of time to complete the course, or put them in the final wave so that they are not going to be run over by other athletes. One other thing that we've seen a lot of people do if a race is comprised of a lot of newbie swimmers is those people are allowed to kind of self-identify themselves when they come and pick up their packets. And rather than putting all of those people in one wave where the safety personnel are going to be overwhelmed by seeing 100 newbie swimmers all in one wave, those people still start with their own wave, but we give them a special colored cap. So the novice swimmers have a bright pink cap, and they're going to still start with their regular wave. Everybody else may have white caps. But what that does is it alerts the safety personnel that this is somebody who's identified themselves as a newbie and that they might be struggling. So we're not putting all of the new swimmers together because we don't want to stress our water safety personnel, but we're still giving them a little bit of peace of mind that you know this person might have trouble, and they know that they're going to be watched as well.
I don't mean to laugh. I can imagine 200-300 pink caps going in together, right? And the havoc that could cause. I'm going to pass it these. All I would say to that, Jim, is that, you know, some things about surveillance and incident management and strategies for watching people are similar no matter who's on the venue. I don't really deal as much with separating out abilities and age groups as just trying to make sure that there's, you know, a safe plan, emergency plan in place. So if you, maybe Greg or Ralph, want to talk more about what you do with different levels and experiences.
I think from the safety perspective that we're treating everyone equally. You know, it can be, I mean, elite people go down just as often as the newbies with the pink caps. The only comment about the pink caps and the self-proclaiming that I'm a newbie is that there's a little bit of hesitation, I think, on the part of egos to do that. So you might have people in white caps who need to be wearing pink ones. I liken that to you come down to the pool and it says slow, medium, and fast. And I always walk out there to one of my 9 pools and go, you know, I look at the guard and I look at the swimmers and I look at the guard. It's, you know, isn't it funny how fast is all relative to your experience in life,
Right.
and kind of walk away. You know?
Yeah, as far as delineating, I mean, we're basically paid to basically plan worst case scenario, so that's what's in our head. If people are fast, that's nice. In San Diego, it tends to be fast, medium, and slow all in the same event is what we tend to experience. And so that's actually a little bit harder to track because the spread between within the heat or the heats are pretty drastic. I would say that if part of our evaluation criteria includes a lot of different things, environmental conditions and basically what the water's like, the number of participants, like I said earlier. But there's an opportunity for, as I'm reviewing a permit, to actually increase depending upon certain issues. And I would say age, especially there's an Iron Kids thing that's going on in San Diego now, and it's a young group. And now, granted, the volunteer base of that has been hugely supportive, but those kids are extremely young. And so I would say that's got me more paranoid than most events because of the age.
I'm going to toss the microphone right back to you too. And for this, you oversee other aquatic sports, the paddling, the surfing, the sailing, all these others. How do you, is there anything that those other disciplines could teach open water as far as preparedness?
Thank you for getting back to the script, Dr. Miller.
That was this one. Just wanted to prove I read it.
Yeah, I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but if you drive down south to 101 and you go across to Half Moon Bay, near there's a place called Mavericks, which is a pretty infamous big surf spot. We lost a surfer there Thursday. It was a Hawaiian surfer, excellent elite class athlete. Paddled in at Mavericks and ate it, and he was a fatality. So what do you learn from that? Well, you learn that it's serious business, and people die in the ocean, and that's something that we constantly remind our people about, whether they're lifeguards or people running events, is that we're talking about human life, and the seriousness of it. When there's a death or a tragedy, that's when we kind of remind ourselves, hey, this is serious stuff. We do that every day, and we just want to pass that on to you, that even the best surfers and the best water people, have problems. Just because you have lifeguards in an event or on a beach or at a pool doesn't guarantee that people aren't going to drown. You're going to do the best you can with the resources that you have. And you hopefully are going to be able to do that. But it isn't a perfect world, even where we have lifeguards. People get injured, people drown, and that's a reality of the situation. So what do you learn from things like surfing tragedies or escort boat running over a guy doing the Molokai race? You learn that you have to be prepared for anything that can happen, that can possibly happen. And do you say to people and to the people running the event, are you prepared to react to those? Amen?
Amen.
As far as the other events, if there's someone on, say, they're sailing or stand-up paddleboards or surf ski or kayaks or canoes, because they're already on top of the water, we don't guard them the same way. But I can tell you, they're just as good at activating our 911 system as anything else. So part of what we're trying to do more and more is event day conditions, and there's, I would say, many more cancellations of those types of events than I've seen so far in rough waters. So I think that group is just a little bit more cognizant of how little help they have right there at hand, whereas maybe as I'm here thinking about this today, the fact that we maybe have one point of contact for them in total for their event, and they have a lot of people, whereas the triathlons and the rough waters are much more guarded, and so people are more hesitant. But it also has to do with I think the number of participants too.
At least they got something to hold on to, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Bruce just joined us from the other meeting, so there were a few questions I wanted to toss out to him also. And one of them is you've seen a lot of different organizations, a lot of different settings, different sports. How do you, as an event director, set up differently based upon your location and the sport that you're facing?
Well, we run for 46 years. We've run an open water swim down in Fort Lauderdale over Christmas, and anywhere from 300 to I think 600 or 700 even. Participants we've had. And we've never had a real incident. There's certainly been a lot of rescues, and we rely almost exclusively, we do rely exclusively on the professional lifeguards along the beach. So we hire extra lifeguards to be out in the water, and they prefer it that way. And when we'd like to think about getting volunteers, we don't. We rely completely on lifeguards and off-duty lifeguards who are brought on duty. And of course, when you're going parallel to the beach, someone gets in trouble, they can leave the course themselves. And we have staggered, there's the stands are every 200 yards down the course of the beach, and then within those 200 yards we have guards out on surfboards or paddle boards in between, so every 100 yards there's someone there, and then there's also people following the course along there. But when we look at swimming, it's a different element. You know, the joggers on the street, we saw that someone has a problem and they fall down in the road, you know, everybody sees it. If you fall down in water, you're below the surface of the level unless someone's watching them. You don't get to see that. And when we talk about the guards and the eyeballs on the swimmers, just 2 weeks ago, Lynn Cox was in my office and was telling me about an English Channel swimmer, a woman by herself, with 2 boats on either side of her, 6 eyeballs dedicated to be watching her the whole time, and they turned away and, hey Jim, how you doing? She's gone. That's how fast it happens. Seizures, you heard someone earlier in the day say, 1 splash and they're down, they sink. And if they don't sink, they're staying flush on the water. So I've certainly seen a couple cases. I mentioned 2 over there, and I neglected to leave another one out, that I was out with a friend of mine, and we were doing snorkeling, some deep water diving, and there's several ways to get shallow water blackout, but that's the most common way. And he's up on the surface and then just passed out and is floating there. I had to get him there. And if I hadn't been there, he would have drowned. So when you see these things, you've got to have your reaction time is critical. Someone's floating in the water face down. They have about a minute, minute and a half, or you know, if they survive, it's irreparable brain damage after a certain amount of time. So when we take a look at other sports, what have they done? How do they have headgear for cycling, for example? Headgear in ice hockey. You know, when I was a kid growing up, no one wore a helmet to play ice hockey. You know, the purists were there, what are you, a sissy? And pretty soon, you know, they're all wearing it. Cycling, it's the same way. It didn't happen overnight. Now it's, you know, some places, you know, riding a motorcycle, it's mandatory now in an awful lot of states. It's not in Florida, by the way. But these things, these other sports are taking a primary concern for safety. But what have we done since Leander drowned swimming the Hellespont? It's the same thing. We're just in there swimming across there, knowing that this water is an inherently dangerous element. And I mentioned over the other side, I didn't tell you this, so I have a son that was in 3 Olympic Games as a water polo player. Not just swimming, but this is a tough sport. You're wrestling, you're fighting, and you know, all kind of that in there. He almost drowned in my backyard pool, swimming, doing some, he was there with my younger children. And they had a team of like 3 or 4 kids, and they wanted to see, you know, if they could do a cumulative underwater swims, and he could match them. So of course he wanted to do that, and every time he'd get ready to start, he'd take 1 or 2 deep breaths. A kid would say something stupid, he'd laugh, start over again. So by the time he took off, and this is in hindsight, he was super hyperventilated. So hyperventilation and shallow water blackout comes from you purge out your oxygen, your residual oxygen from your lungs, so that when you go along, you just come to a point where there's no more oxygen to feed your brain, and you just black out. And you might even still be there like this, underwater. But you drown. So just assuming hypothetically, no one knows what Fran Crippen did, but you know, when you're there at the end of a race, 200 or 300 yards away, you're breathing this side, this side, this side, this side, and then you hold it down for 2 or 3, blackout, right there. You sink in the water like this. Unless someone's right there on top of you, you're not going to be seen, you're going to drown, and they're going to probably diagnose it as a heart attack or some other type of condition when really it's some other cause. So what we've done at the Hall of Fame, and it's been several years, initially there were several reasons for it, is what is a device that could do that? What is a device that could protect you? And we've come up with an invention that we've gotten now, it's patented over in China, and we've applied for the patent here. This is a waistband, and I know you don't have capability to show the DVD, so I'll put this down for a second and talk louder. But this is a waistband that goes around here, like this. And this is on a swivel back here, so it goes this way, but it rides here. It does not interfere with your feet. It doesn't interfere with your arm stroke. And it stays within the hydrodynamic vortex of the drag. So the water flows around you this way, but the drag kind of pushes it this way. It curls back this way. So you're not towing it. And this one's a model that's more designed for racing or swimming. And this one's more for training. And this one, this bag, is essentially a inflatable dry bag. So this would be, you know, not inflated at all. There's a little sack in here that gets inflated. But you go out and you do your training and you go down to the beach and you don't want your flip-flops and your wallet and your keys stolen and your towel. So you slip that in here, roll it up, inflate it, and then you're off to go. And actually, when you fill this up, I filled this up with 10 pounds worth of stuff. And it's heavy, but once you get in the water, you don't even notice it. It's no different than just dragging this little thing behind you. Because again, you're not towing it. And I think, you know, there's a lot of misapprehension about what this is. Some people think, you know, if requested to have it, you know, back here. I think Rob Copeland said, you know, well, he does something with a float and it goes back here. That's how he'd like it. Well, wait a minute. That interferes with your kick, and now you're towing something. You're not towing this. And so this, you know, these are new ideas that create something.
They were around in the, let's see, it was the early 60s.
Well, not like this.
Not as
not
nice,
like this.
but it was a big metal torpedo buoy we pulled when we were
That's
doing
correct, but
it.
these are things that went around over your shoulder like this and this way. That's
Yeah.
an old can
This is
that's
much
been
nicer.
around since the 1920s.
Mhm.
Completely different thing. That's to go for a lifeguard to save someone else.
Yeah.
This is for you. So the other advantage of this is the color. One summer I lived over in Zurich, Switzerland. And if you know the Zurich Sea, it's about a mile across, and they've got public beaches on one side, public beaches on the other side. So it'd be neat to swim across. So I swam, the first day I swam across, these motorboats are coming 20, 30 knots down, you know, just right down the middle of the Zurich Sea. They don't see it. So I get over the other side and talk about it, and some guy says, well, you're an idiot. You got to wear one of these caps, these white and red caps, so they'll see you. So I go and do it again. Well, they don't see you. That doesn't see you because you're swimming with your head down in the water. So now we have an issue when you go out and you do some training in areas. You've got jet skis, you've got boats. Here's some visibility. And I wish you could see the, you know, the video that we have that shows this. But they're online on the Hall of Fame's website. There's a couple of them. So it helps with that problem. You have a cramp. We've heard about cramps or dizziness or hyperthermia, hydrothermia, whatever, everything. You know, too cold, too hot. There's no shame in stopping for a second. Hyper?
No, I said whatever thermia.
Whatever, there's probably that. What shame is there from doing this? Or if you happen to be out there swimming and a non-swimmer from the beach is caught in a riptide, well, if you have enough presence of mind, you unclip it from your waist, take it out here, and push it over to them so they don't drown you, and then you save somebody else while you're out there. So there's all kinds of applications for this. And we have a larger one, and we're experimenting with this, but you've got your paddle boarders, or you've got your stand-up paddle boarders that might be out there watching. I know there's a Laura Hamill who is writing for, she's your editor. So she's going out there, and she coaches a stand-up group, and this is kind of after talking to her. She's out there in her stand-up paddleboard with her master swimmers out in the open water. Well, now if someone gets in trouble, this is something we've designed so that you can clip this right on to where your leash gets attached on your stand-up paddleboard. But it can have, it's still floatable, inflatable. She can have water in there to hydrate the athletes. She can have any kind of life-saving devices in here that might be a help and a benefit. Or if someone's really in trouble, she can pass it over to them and they can float on it until something else comes. This can also be done recreational. This is kind of the one where the dad can swim across with the kids and load up lunch and go from one point to the other. So point-to-point swimming, all of these, training. But the more I hear what was in there today is that we ought to be thinking about a device that guarantees the safety of people, not only for this, but as a lawyer also, before I got into this kind of thing, I can just see it up on court. Were you aware, race director, that there was a product that could have possibly saved this swimmer's life? Why didn't you use it? And I think the day is coming like that. And I'm not defending the lawyers and the tort law for that, but it makes sense. When I think of what happened to Fran or somebody, if this had been there and you saw the buoy and it stopped, and you're 50 yards away on a jet ski, or even you're 25 yards away in a boat, you see something stop, or if another swimmer swims by it, wait a minute, why isn't that float moving? There's something wrong. could that have saved his life? Could that have saved any of the 16 lives that were lost in this past year in open water races? So I think we really need to give some consideration to this. This may not be the final answer, but what have we done since Leander drowned swimming across the Hellespont to ensure some water safety? Nothing.
Thank you.
So.
Questions from the audience?
I have another perspective, and then I'll ask the question. I thought this session was how other sports protect their athletes, and I have one. I am a nationally certified safety director for water ski tournaments. And I use the word certified because I was certified by USA Water Skiing. They have a program that certifies safety directors. When a lake wants to host a water ski tournament, it has to be sanctioned by the national body. And they cannot grant that sanction unless the safety director is named well in advance. And there is a checklist of safety features that has to be approved not only by the sanctioning body, but also by that safety director before that sanction is even given. And I'm kind of surprised that with open water swimming, a sanction can be approved without any consideration to who the safety director is or what safety features are going to be provided for that event. And this has been going on with water skiing for 20 years. Of course, we're dealing with boats, we're dealing with waters, and we're dealing with multiple events. Not just water skiing, but jumping, kneeboarding, hydrofoiling, speed skiing, and so on and so forth. But that event cannot take place without that certified safety director. They've been trained to do it. And there's different levels. You start off as a safety coordinator, then you become a state certified, then you become regional, and then over a course of time you become national. If you want to go anywhere in the country to be a water safety director for a national tournament. And my question is, why do we not have this type of certification for our sport? Why are we just trusting that the race director is going to make sure that it is a safe event? They've got so many other things to worry about. I'm going to be the safety director this summer for the 25K in Indiana. This is the second time that I've done it. Our safety director is so swamped with other stuff, it's nice to have a safety director that's going to coordinate everything else. It's just part of it. He'll make sure I'm doing my job. But it would be nice if this association could start certifying people before the sanction is given to guarantee that it is going to be a safe event. So my question is, why aren't we doing that?
Well, kind of do. That's a great question. I'm gonna start by saying that's a great question. We kind of do. You know, I don't know. The sanction process nationally hasn't really been embraced by everybody everywhere. When you talked about differences we've seen, some people believe in the sanction process verbatim, like here in Pacific, which requires a safety coordinator for events and has for a couple of years now, and also has, you know, safety plans, emergency plans, diagrams of the course, start-finish diagrams, EMS on site, all those kind of things. So it's happening in some places, but I agree it hasn't happened everywhere. I think that's kind of what people are starting to realize and why we're all here today. And I think some kind of certification of your safety people would probably be a great idea, but probably applies to you as much as anybody, huh?
Sure. Yeah, one thing that, you know, I run the race director certification program, so this is what I do for triathlon. And one thing that we've seen is that a lot of times the race director will come and attend class and say, you know what, my staff needs to be certified as well. And then they send their key personnel to a later class. So we're seeing not only the main race director come and be certified, but also their staff members, their course coordinators, their safety directors, all of that. But one thing that I just want to kind of point out that I feel passionately about is that certification does not guarantee safety. We started this certification program 5 years ago, thinking that we're going to be certifying these race directors, they're going to know what to do, we're going to have fewer fatalities, nothing bad is going to happen at their races, and that was so far from the truth. The year after race director certification started, the following year we had 8 fatalities at USA Triathlon sanctioned events. 7 of them were certified race directors. And so the fact of the matter is that just because you're trained and just because you do everything right doesn't mean that the athlete still won't have an issue. And so it's important to keep in mind that yes, the education is paramount, and I really feel strongly that providing interactive education, education where you're talking through scenarios and going through how to develop a crisis management plan and manual, that sort of education is so important, but it doesn't mean that things still won't go wrong. You can do absolutely everything right and someone can still die at your event. And so knowing that is really, really important, and I think it's an important thing to put out there that things will still go wrong, unfortunately.
One of the things that I have to do.
Hold just a sec.
I'm sorry.
You guys have anything to say? No? Okay, go ahead, sorry.
One of the things that I have to do is if I get an athlete injured in one of my events where I'm the safety director, I have forms that have to be filled out that are sent to the national body so they know that there has been an accident at that particular site. And if they choose to come in and investigate, you know, why that accident happened and why weren't things followed or why weren't procedures followed, is another step. And of course, the insurance body that you know, blankets our sport needs to know too. So another form has to be sent to them. So, you know, we can keep our sport alive. Somebody mentioned this morning that we don't want lawyers to govern us on what we do. Well, that's what's going to happen if we get a lot of lawsuits. They're going to dictate to us exactly how our events should be run. And maybe just drive it right out of the sport.
Can we talk for 30 seconds about gathering that data? You know, the concept of what they're doing by gathering data for every incident is a concept that the aquatic industry, aside from USLA, who can pull from certified agencies, or you know, we just presented in Sacramento last week 160 agencies over 4 years, 19 million visitors, 3,000 rescues in a pool setting. But what we're not finding out is what's happening in our races. We know when someone drowns. We don't hear anything about near misses. So, you know, near misses are just as critical as an immersion incident where someone actually drowns. We call heart attacks, seizures, and strokes drownings, you know, which is ludicrous because they're totally different things. So our ability to gather data and use that data and gather data from events, and any risk manager will tell you the near misses are more important than the hits, and what you can learn from those. This is a critical area we need to explore also, how to gather statistics from these kind of events and these kind of incidents to be able to track and figure out where our highest exposure is.
I was just going to mention, and unfortunately with triathlon, the lawyers have already come on board. And
because they people.
Well, and actually, interestingly enough, while the vast majority of our fatalities are swim related, we've had 23 fatalities in the last 5 years. 18 of those have been on the swim. So the vast majority of fatalities have been on the swim. The vast majority of lawsuits are from bikes being hit by cars. So it's not necessarily from the fatalities because the race directors are doing everything right in terms of the rescue. The rescues have been described as heroic. We have had some lawsuits and some publicly, you can look them up. We had a trial just a year ago in the summer that was very widely publicized, but unfortunately with triathlon, the lawyers have gotten on board, and so it's something that we're constantly aware of. The risk management and the safety is absolutely the most important thing.
One other addition to that. I can tell you the United States Master Swimming would be very interested in seeing your form.
Sure.
So get that to us.
I brought it with me.
We're sponsoring it. The gentleman in the back will be happy to take it from you, and we'll learn from you. That's why we're here. I mean, that's great. You can give a copy to USA Triathlon. They won't take it, and they will use it, I'm sure. I mean, all that type of input is critical to all of us. But again, that's why we're here sharing this. As far as you have to understand how events occur. Typically what happens is somebody's been conducting an event for 20 years. And then the United States Masters or Triathlon or FINA or somebody will go to that organization or they'll apply for that sanction. Usually to get that type of coverage and marketing out there. But what they want is they want the marketing, they want all the pieces, but they don't want to change what they do. And they've done it that way for 20 years with never an incident. That doesn't mean it's right, as we all know. So changing the mindset as event prospective event directors come on board that have conducted races forever, and changing that response is difficult. So I have a sheet, it's actually 2 pages, that I developed for FINA to give to all open water events. And I can't say I was warmly received for that. Okay? Because it's a dramatic change, cross-cultural, in areas where they may not be able to survive, to provide all the things that I may feel they need. But it's interesting, in my position with FINA FINA views me as conflicted as because I'm a U.S. national team physician. The United States views me as conflicted because I'm FINA. So the only thing I've got to worry about is taking care of athletes, which is pretty cool.
A man without a country.
That's right. That's right. So, but get us that form. I'd love to see that. Other input? In the back. I'll bring it back.
I'd just like to comment about the safety buoy and perhaps ask a question about where you think the future of it may be. I think a lot of us participating in this conference fear the potential to overregulate our sport and would not look forward to a time when events required the use of flotation devices and or wetsuits in the guise of safety. But I do think that is a useful device and can see some potential specifically for the state of New York, of which I reside, which has a lot of lawyers. And as a result, there are many bodies of water that are off limits to swimmers because it's unreasonable for them to be lifeguarded. And I would appreciate if the video or the promotion of this device somehow addressed that and could perhaps work towards persuading the powers that be to maybe consider allowing swimmers access with said device.
There's one question that just dawned on me. What's the cost?
The retail price is twice what?
Today's price. Geez, what did I say over there? The Ginsu? Does the Ginsu?
You have to say the same thing in each room.
Well, I'll say this. We'll leave the other guy over there. These, I've got some here. You know, I've got a limited number. What we want to do is get these out to try people. So these $10, which is these close to that. These are the other ones are $15. And what I want to do is maybe caution you if you get one of the big ones. I haven't used this yet. This just came from China the other day as the sample, but this is kind of more recreational. And to get to your question there, I mean, ideally, when you're talking about not wanting them in races, well, when you're going out and training in the open water, there's really no reason why this can't be used. When you're talking about some of the mass swims that we've seen, you know, it might be tough if 800 people are going in the water at the same time with this. But then again, perhaps when you hear that, I don't know who it was that said that, you know, most of the rescues that they do in the swims are in the first 100 and 150 yards because people are hyperventilating and getting in there, particularly with triathletes or something that might not be that strong as swimmers. Maybe we have to think about reevaluating how we do start races and how many people go in at a time. Because I still believe that, you know, as a purist, a swimmer who's swum my whole life, I mean, I mentioned over there, my first open water swim was 51 years ago when I was 10 years old. And spending years of just swimming a mile out and a mile in, going out to bell buoys, you know, and doing it just for kicks. How foolish that was when you think of submerged objects in the pool, when you think about any contingencies, cramps, anaphylactic shock, jellyfish stings that could send you, that could paralyze you, that it's very foolish. And this is probably one of these reasons why we do it. Rob?
We just heard the other room, I don't know if y'all were in there, when Kate just shared how she's using it now to save her life. You want to recount the story?
Yeah, I'd almost like to have her come over here and tell you in her own words, because when I came in and came up here this, you know, when I set it up out there this morning, this woman comes up, and it was Kate Alexander, who runs the 800-member swim down in the Cayman Islands, and she came up and she told me this device changed her life, that it made her feel so much more secure out in the water, that her husband, who's, you know, a shaky swimmer, now can go out and feel real secure. And she told me also that one of the open water swimmers had his legs cut off by a propeller from a boat, and another one got, you know, 2 or 3 got run over by jet skis that aren't watching people. So, you know, this is just a little bit of her story. I mean, you know, how could this device change my life? Well, you have to hear it from her. So I think there's really some tremendous opportunities here. I think this has got to be the way of the future when you see, you know, the potential drownings. And so while we're here, I'll be out there. I have a limited number of these things, but you can order them from the International Swimming Hall of Fame. And the other thing I probably neglected to mention was that the patent applications and the patents are in the name of the International Swimming Hall of Fame, and any money that goes to support that also supports the Swimming Hall of Fame. And I didn't mention in this room, like I did over there, is Rob Butcher and Master Swimming is out of the national governing bodies, whether it be U.S. Swimming, U.S. Water Polo, diving. Master Swimming provides the greatest support for the International Swimming Hall of Fame, and I want to thank you for that. And I think part of that vision goes to sponsoring something like this that the other sports haven't done. And I think, you know, Rob's leading a very visionary organization that you guys are all part of, and I think, you know, this is the wave of the future. Open water swimming is such a great event. We all want this because it's great. You know, I'd rather have salt on me than chlorine. I'd rather have, you know, in fresh water, there's nothing like coming out of fresh water. And it's a tragedy to see that swim coaches are afraid to take their kids in the water because they don't have that control over the kids. You know, they don't have that safety. They're not walking up and down the pool and can observe everybody. And maybe this device can get these kids in the water. So, the price. This one model, $10. The other two, $15, but there's 2 other ones. The one's maybe too big, but these are the loadable ones. This is the one I think I would suggest that if you're a race organizer, you might want to consider this. This is something that you can put a sponsor's label on. They could pay for this. If you're doing a race and you want to give them something instead of a t-shirt, give them something they can use.
Thank you. I guess I just wanted to point out, you know, all of this is about keeping the sport viable. Open water swimming and triathlon, and I'm a lawyer as well, so I know everybody hates me just because of that. I apologize. But in order for these races to be viable, if you're putting on races, you have to assume that things are going to go wrong, and you have to assume you're going to get sued. The only way to protect yourself is insurance. It doesn't mean things don't go wrong, but protecting yourself is to be insured. And to get insurance, you need certification. So all of this organizing and the bureaucracy, as offensive as it is, I think, ultimately what's going to keep the sport alive and allow small organizers to be able to put on races. The days when you can just, you know, take 20 people and do a little off-the-cuff swim just for fun, we just can't do it anymore. And I think you just can't put your head in the sand and hope it's going to go away. It's coming to get you. Not necessarily me, but it's coming to get you. So I'm all for the certification process.
Other questions? Yes.
In looking at the challenges of an open water race and safety, to me, I kind of pulled out 3 key things, I guess, in terms of one being visualization of an incident, and another being response time, and the last one being communication. And in terms of some of the topic in related sports, I'm involved in automotive racing a lot, and so looking at that, it involves extreme incidents at very high speeds, and you have to have fast response and communication as to any incidents that's going on. And so in auto racing, that's been used internationally all over for systems been in place for years is, corner workers stationed at each stand, and on different levels, lots of times these people are volunteers who have just been trained on a flag signaling system that then responds, the first responders and the competitors to know there's an incident or something going on. And so my thoughts are maybe something like that is something could be implemented in swimming, that something visually a competitor can see quickly to know that they're in an area of an incident, and there might be some response going on there, something that you could easily train volunteers to do. So all they're doing is visually looking at their surroundings and knowing that someone else will come in to respond to that, or if they've got someone hanging on to like a kayak, that a way to signal the emergency personnel or the lifeguards to come and help them out. And so I don't know if internally some of the organizations already have their own quick signaling systems, but I always see that it's the fastest way to communicate. It takes time to push a button on a radio or do anything. All you got to do is raise something in the air, that out of the corner of your eye, you catch that signal. And I mean, we use the flags for beach conditions, to show the currents and all that. And that's something I've done a lot of, ocean swims and all that, and I don't see that all that often, even on, race day conditions, anything telling you what's going on in the water other than a poorly articulated, bullhorn message that, you can't, you got lots of people chatting around you don't necessarily hear or pick up. So, I'm wondering if anyone's thoughts on implementing, something more visual.
I can't see.
Glenda back there in Pacific, we talked about, we've been trying to make people understand the whole kayak theory doesn't really work for a lot of conditions, a lot of races, because a lot of people, great to have another set of eyes, but what are you going to do when someone's 8 feet from you and struggling in the water, and you don't even know how to get out of it, let alone get back into it, let alone support them on it, let alone. So we went to a rescue tube for the kayakers. And we went with yellow. I think I said this morning, a yellow tube, so that if they do hold it up for assistance, or they do hand somebody or wave it, highly visual on the course, signal the pros to come help, because there's limited resources in a lot of our bigger races, 1,200 people, you can't get enough paid lifeguards there. So they signal, but the idea was it's yellow because everyone will know it's not red, and it's not a lifeguard, it's a volunteer. Therefore, maybe they need to get there. So I think we're going to get where you're talking about. The other thing we talked about is as a communication device, when you got people on a triangle that's a mile long and you got 15 people and there's one every 100 meters, a good whistle, a Fox 40 whistle, a P-less whistle, one that'll blow the water out and blow your ears off, is a great signal device. And we use those in the water park industry everywhere because you cannot mistake and not hear it. So I think auditory as well as some kind of signal or flag or something is critical. I worry more about cancellation, course shortening, those kind of things that we don't really address anywhere. You know, what if conditions go bad halfway through the race? It's a long race. How do you shorten a course? Can you shorten a course? Has anybody ever thought of that? Is it it's either here or there, canceled or not? So I think there's a lot of emergency contingency stuff that needs to be explored.
Yeah. Right. For us, pretty basic, but the international sign of distress, a hand in the air. And one of the benefits we have is because we have the observation post and people actually watching, and then the ability to communicate with people with radios, it's easier for us, right? I freely admit that. But what we tell all of our, a little off topic here, but we have a huge kayaking population in La Jolla, and there's multiple rental agencies, and they're not lifeguarded by us on a regular basis, but they're in our lifeguarded area. And so they're taught to basically put their paddle as high in the air as they can and wave it back and forth. And you'd be pretty amazed that if you're sitting there just watching water and watching an event, and all of a sudden you see a hand go back and forth or a paddle going back and forth, more color the better. But when you see that, that generally gets your attention. And if for non-professional lifeguards, if it doesn't get your attention, it gets someone else's attention. And that goes pretty quick nowadays, depending upon where you are. But as far as 911 calls and just that transfer of information, people are very, very quick to say, that person looks like they need help. And that's a resource, for especially for you folks that don't have lifeguard agencies, is just the eyes and ears of people who are focused in on that. Anything like that's going to activate something, and then of course it's going to fall back to, well, what is your plan that you have already in place?
And the actual signal, the actual motion signal, I was talking a little bit this morning about how the eye works. You can focus on 1 degree at a time in your field of vision, active vision, and be able to see it. You get color and motion at 40 degrees, your secondary field of vision, and you get motion at like 170 to 180 degrees. So motion's good. Saw it out of the corner of my eye becomes exactly what Greg's saying about, when you wave a paddle, it'll draw your head to it, even if you're not really looking at it. So maybe motion and color in that whole symbol. We do a lot about scanning and how guards see when they actually look, and looking but actually seeing. And so those 3 things are critical for us when we teach lifeguards how to actually spot. It becomes narrowing that field from motion to motion and color to direct vision and moving your head.
Other questions? Well, I want to thank the panelists. I think we have about 15 minutes before the closing remarks by Maddie, and so I'd encourage you to attend that. So we have about a 15-minute break. We'll be up here for another 4 or 5 minutes to answer any questions that you may bring to us. Thanks for the panelists, as well as thank you for being here.